Hi, Kurt McNamara with the TrimTab book group, and we're really honored to have David Koski to join us today and talk about modules. And I won't try and describe any of it. I'll just say that in addition to having worked on models for decades, David's a great guy. We live close enough, we can get together occasionally, and we have a lot of fun talking about stuff. So I'm gonna mute myself, hand it over to David.
Hello, my name is David Koski. I usually go by David Brian Koski now because with the internet, there's more than one. Um, anyway, I've been doing this since 1983, approximately. It's over 40 years. Hi, Bonnie. Nice to see you. I'm sorry I missed your presentation. I'm in the car on last Saturday. I'm like, dang it, I can't even get to it. And I apologize. It's great to see you. We go way back. Kirby and I go way back. It was funny. Bonnie mentioned something earlier about a presentation I did at the Buckminster Fuller Institute in Los Angeles, 1991. And the entire presentation, I kept saying T module, which was part of the Synergetics module set, but I realize now it should have been the E module, which then works great with the volume accountability of five-fold symmetric forms, and especially some of the main ones in Synergetics. So to start with, calling this beast, which is the five main modules in Synergetics. And typically people go, well, A and B, and they might have heard of T and E or S, but I like Kirby's arrangement of these letters, and I hope it's okay that I made these Atari style fonts from 1983, basically. I hope to get more sophisticated. So within these five modules, which are in Synergetics, the first thing that Fuller obviously goes over a lot are the A equaling B. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into that, and I'm apologetic for not having cardboard models, but I broke out the stuff I had from 30 plus years ago, and my eyesight isn't as good for one thing, and my patience isn't there. Anyway, start out with the A and B. They equal each other. First of all, we got to get all of our volumes synced up, so we're all on the same page. So obviously this is a tetrahedron. It's not the right scale for proportionality, but it's about the center to center being 2 radii equaling 2 as our edge for the tetrahedron. So I made this tetrahedron. It's the only thing I made lately. And it's broken up into, it's an orthogonal projection into the center of the tetrahedron. So there's 24 A modules. I made this size because with Zone Tool, I wanted them to be the same length, edge length, which is kind of important in a way just to have proportionality. So we know that A and B are equal to each other, and I'm not demonstrating how the A and the B work together within the octahedron and the tetrahedron, but that's available material. What's interesting is then Fuller wanted a volume 5 polyhedra that fit into his concentric hierarchy, and he came up with a rhombic tricontahedron, which could be divided into 120 parts. So that would be 5 times 24 or 120. And he had it as B equaling A equaling T. And he must have been extremely happy about that. And historically or in the archive, I don't know. I'd like to know who figured out that that was wrong. And it was so close. He was so close. He wanted, this might be a little hard to read, but anyway, he wanted that volume 5 rhombic tricontahedron from the center to the center of the face to be radius 1. But look at the number, it's 0.99948. And then he goes off for a long time in Synergetics 2 about this. And it's very fascinating. Kirby figured out that to get that number, it's the cube root of 2/3 times 5 over the square root of 2, which is a whole story in itself. But it was interesting because I had done this presentation. I was always talking T modules, and Kirby threw some gum into the brain gear, and he said, it's really the E module, Dave, that you're talking about. And I just realized, yeah, I have to do this right as well. But it turned out the E module, which is, we call it the 5+ rhombic tricontahedron, because from the origin to the center of the face, it's 1, or the radius, and there's 120 E modules. The E module RT, we call it the 5+ because the volume is 5.00775558. And so it's just slightly larger. Now, for presentation purposes, it's impossible to, I mean, it's not impossible, but to have the length of a T module and then that extra length of an E module with the tolerances that we work with, it's just not there. But this is what we call, we could call it first because it's so close. This will be the volume 5 rhombic tricontahedron. And amazingly, not really, but I mean, it's cool that the diameter from center of one side across to the other center is 2. So it's the same edge as the tetrahedron. And also, there's supposed to be 5 of these in here. And it doesn't look possible, but it's because of the orientation. It's such sharp points on the tetrahedron, and this is much more rounded and everything converges to the center. But volumetrically, it's right. And that's when this is volume 1 and this is volume 5. Okay, and that's how the A and the B and the T are all equal, because the T module is 1/20th of this volume 5 rhombic tricontahedron. But now let's call this rhombic tricontahedron the 5+.
And may I ask questions? Just a quick question. When you say B equals A equals T, you mean volume B equals volume A equals volume T?
Yes, and I apologize for that. Yeah, I mean, almost everything I'm talking about is in volumes. And what was I going to say about that? Sometimes the volume is precisely modelable, and you can build things with those modules. Other times it's a volumetric equivalent, and I use like volumetric accountability for a lot of these forms. So what was it? I can't remember your name. Was it Richard? The guy that is going to Atlanta. Lucky for him, say hi to Paul Hildebrand for me. But this is the T module, and you can see that it's lacking some of the blue links. Well, they're just too small. But I wanted to get this to the presentable size that I could do it with my hand. So the edge of this tetrahedron is like 4 3/4 inches, but I mean, the next size up would be like 7 inches, and then you got really big pieces. But anyway, this is the size of the tetrahedron here. And now, that goes in here. What we discovered with the E module is that you can scale 3 edge lengths by the golden proportion, or phi, 1.618034, and you get a rhombic tricontahedron that we call the super RT because it's sized up. And at this point, the icosahedron of edge 2 fits perfectly inside of this rhombic tricontahedron. So that's interesting, because now we realize that E module volumes scale by phi, and you can make this is a small, oh, I can't even know what the screen. Okay, this is a smaller RT, and this is the next, not RT, but the next E module scaled by phi. And then there's even a larger one. So the BAT all equal 1/24th of a unit tetrahedron volume. The E module is just slightly larger, and I did subtract, so it's 0.000646 difference, which is very minute. What we learned then is that we have different size E modules, and we could phi scale them. And I use the notation like the one smaller is lowercase e to 3, and then the E module, and then the next scale up E3. You can see the volumetric change, which is very significant because it's about it is 4.236068 increasing, or 2.236068 for decreasing. Okay,
Could you explain phi scaling? Phi scaling, what do you mean by scaling by phi? You mean increasing the strut length by phi?
yes, you can project. I do have a better way of presenting that. Thanks for bringing that up. So this is a E module opened up. It actually can be made with a square. And you can see that this, I'm translating on the TV here. So we got this length here, and then it goes to this length here, and overall it goes to that length. So that is the phi increasing or decreasing. It can go on forever each direction. And since you do it in 3 directions, you're multiplying by phi to the 3rd. I apologize for not being more clear on that. So that's why I get the beginning of a whole series of modules that are E modules. I don't know why my hands are. Anyway, so thank you, Lionel, for that.
If I can ask one more,
Sure.
scaling generally with Bucky is 1 and then 2. And I don't believe he talks about phi scaling. So why does phi scaling interest you?
Because it works, absolutely. Because I found out that you can make, this is an overall E module, and it's made up of the next size down E module and the next size down E module, like that. And it completely adds up as a way to model the E module, which I found extremely fascinating. But I was always calling them T modules, so I didn't really sync up the volume correctly. And once the volume started working, it got really good. And there are a lot more models that I can make with E modules and things like that, a lot of fivefold, but I can also volumetrically account precisely with them. So it worked really well for me, or I think, for synergetics. Losing my train of thought. No. So one thing to know is that the larger, this E3 equals 4E plus 1E smaller, which is the same as the S that'll do the same thing, which I call phi scaling. And these are volumetric equivalents.
I'm sorry, I hope I'm not annoying with the question. So capital E is a large E, and then little e is a small e, and it's smaller.
I'm sorry. I use capital E as the E module from synergetics. And then I use the 3 is because it's really a 3rd powering by phi. So I go large E with the 3. And since I don't want to use a small e without anything, I just go down to the E, lowercase e with the 3. That's how I step them down. And then it would go up to 6, and it'd go down to -6 like that. Or they get smaller and larger. And it was an easy way to notate the volume so that all you have to use is integers and all the irrational bits are all inside of the module, so you can account for these very simply with whole numbers. So then I was working on the volumetric equivalent of how many E's fit into a icosahedron, a regular icosahedron, and I have this written down as 420E plus 100 lowercase e to the 3 is in the volume of the VE is 420S plus 100 S3, which is kind of the best part of this, what I call this presentation, in that ratio of volumes, the VE and 20 and the icosahedron 18.51229 it's a ratio called, we call it the S factor, 1.080363, and I wrote down how to get it algebraically. But there's a 1-to-1 ratio between the E and the S module, which I don't know. There's a fair amount of us that have always been trying to figure out what the hell's happening in the VE jitterbug to the icosa. Well, this doesn't answer that question, but it does show this volumetric equivalence, not equivalency, but ratio. Now, I'm losing my train of thought a little bit, because it's always like, what came first? Was it the S module, the E module? How did I figure this out? But I knew this ratio, I just didn't recognize that number right away as when I ratioed the S to the E, just the two, and I realized, well, of course, they all work together. And that's kind of a, what would I say? Okay, in synergetics, first of all, he doesn't mention the golden proportion or the phi proportion. We'll just take that up another day. But he put out the E module as the as what's in the 5+ tricontahedron, because it didn't work with the volume 5 rhombic tricontahedron. So the E was just kind of a placeholder. It didn't really go anywhere. It just was there. And the S is kind of the same way. You read synergetics, you look at the S module, you know, you could tell Fuller was onto something. And they kind of, that's where synergetics ends with Fuller. There's the E module and the S module. I think this is incredible that they can be paired together in this ratio with the VE and the icosa. So I'm pleased about that, but I'm also trying to make these things so they're all proportional to each other in this presentation, the volume. So what's left here? Here are the beast modules where BAT equals 1/24. The E module equals 0.041, just slightly larger. And even the S module isn't much larger. So that's kind of the point, is that they're all really nicely interconnected. I did end up getting kind of lucky with Zone Tool. Here's your icosahedron. This is not to scale, but this is a group of 4 S modules made with, the yellows are taped in there because they really don't work. But that's kind of how they're oriented, and they're oriented, there's 6 of these on the icosahedron. So there's 24 of these S modules. And this edge here is part of an octahedra. I apologize for not having the full length on there. I kind of just made this thing. So, and I got lucky today. I've had this probably since Fuller Institute was opened up in LA, this vector flexor. And boy, oh boy, it just about exactly matches the edge on this Zone Tool icosahedron, which I thought was pretty nice to have. I guess maybe I'm rushing this because I just don't know how much time I have. One thing that's pretty dang interesting, in my opinion, is that the S module can describe the concentric hierarchy, where the first column is 6, 4, 3, 1, and that equals, and you can see that I have S6 there and S3 because I can jump up and down with those modules. And I should have shown that, and I will. So it's just interesting that the S module can actually volumetrically account for the concentric hierarchy. And I'm gonna show something else I forgot. Or maybe I didn't, but once again, the E module from one size to the next size down, it's equal 4E plus 1E lowercase e 2, 3 to the E3. And that's a very important thing to know, because it works perfectly, and you can move module volumes around and actually pinpoint various ways to model something even. And so maybe I didn't show this one yet. I was kind of proud of that, which was the T and the E. And then from the T and the E, we also went from the E to the S. So in the future, I plan on having this a little better. But I haven't done this stuff in 30 years. This is the first presentation I've done since 1991 at the Buckminster Fuller Institute. And I stopped making cardboard models because they're a lot of work. And Zone Tool really made it easier. What made it extremely good was there's a product or software called VZone, which is virtual zone, and it allows you to make a lot of things that you can't do with the Zone Tool by itself. But I don't know what else I can talk about. It's probably a rushed deal, but every one of these topics really has its own chapter or chapters easily. I just wanted to present this relationship of the beast, or the BEAST. I did make a kind of a, I wouldn't call it satanic, but I got the BEAST at the points, and it shows the interrelationship. Every one of them is connected to the other ones. Anyway, just for fun. And I'm not sure. I guess I should open this up to questions. Lionel had some really great questions, and that was helpful. Thank you.
Well, if you're willing to cope with my confusion and ignorance,
No, it's okay.
then I would go on. But Kurt's our facilitator. I'll just look if he's nodding or not.
I think so, but the other thing I'm gonna ask, I know, David, you showed me a page on Beast that maybe Kirby had put up.
Yeah.
Should somebody put that up for you?
I'm about to put it up in the chat window.
Okay,
Hey,
why
thank
don't you go ahead and share it, Kirby? Do a screen share and then get any comments on that, and then let's go to Lionel, if that's all right.
Yeah. Kirby and I have been working very close together over the years, over the decades. And I'm grateful that he's there.
Okay, so I just lost you a little at the capital E and lowercase e, and I just want to point out, I love Beast. I mean, there's something to be said for a good acronym. So if you can just help me understand capital E and small e, because we had capital E equals certain things plus a
All
small
right,
e.
I can see where the confusion is. I can see where the
comic.
I will fix
All I
it.
ever hear is people always say, "Where's the line?" And they always ask comedians, "Where's the line?" But very rarely do they say to presidents and senators, "Where's the line?"
Is
I
that
don't know
coming
what
from?
happened.
Which bomb would be the line?
Stewart is absolutely right here. It is our
That's
right
not me.
as voters to constantly challenge and demand better.
Somebody's got their YouTube on.
especially
I don't
because.
think
Might,
it's me.
might be you, David. It looks like maybe you
It's
got a
always interesting to me
screen.
that people.
I don't have a clue if I did.
Okay,
Somehow.
I'm trying to close
are the
anything I
ones
got.
That,
I don't see it yet.
go again, push human nature too far.
I don't know how that's
But
on.
the action.
okay, I just muted you, David, while you figure out
We proved it is David,
what
unfortunately.
it is. Um, and I can unmute you, or you can unmute yourself when you're ready.
So, does anyone see the screen that you asked me to share that I've got on the screen?
Yeah, yep. And
So
if you could just walk through it, I think that'll be very useful.
I'll do that quickly. The link in the chat is to this page. It's over on Synergio. It's a public link. And some of these pictures are by David Koski from using what he calls V-Zone. It's a guy named Scott Vorthman. So you can just sit at your computer and pretend you have an infinite supply of Zone. I think they complement each other. I don't think V-Zone will put Zone out of business at all. It's free though and cool. So there's your A module inside a tetrahedron. You're drilling into the face, basically carving it up in a consistent way each time. A guy named Richard Hawkins did this graphic. And there's your B module. It piggybacks, you could say, on top of the A. It's like pushing the flagpole up a little bit further, as in this picture.
Big pardon, Kirby,
Yeah.
just in the spirit of deconfusing me, might deconfuse someone else along with me. So just go up a little, because the new letter came in, the letter D, and I'm confused by that. If you go up.
Well, this is B as in boy, as in the bug B.
Go back up further, there was an edge D. Given the D.
Well, down further, there's a D on this diagram here.
Okay. Okay.
Fuller does the obvious, which is keep pushing the flagpole up higher and higher. Everything widthwise on the tetrahedron and pushing up, these are held center. He does a long investigation about how you can basically send these two mutually perpendicular segments along like train tracks up, down, and side to side, and the volume always stays the same. So he talks about that in a very general sense. But
that's really helpful to me. So you're saying that this drawing from Fuller that has the alphabet rising A, B, C, D, E,
yeah,
are the modules. That is an A module, that is a B module, that is
he doesn't ever talk again about C or D modules, but that's
Okay.
where they would logically go if you wanted to label
Okay.
them. And then in another picture, I think David knows it well, instead of going E here, he goes A prime because he doesn't want to, and then B prime, C prime. He doesn't want to run into his nomenclature. Like if it's going to be consistent, then that can't be E because we're talking about the E below. I'm about to get to that. But before I get to that, what can the A's and the B's do that now that they've been introduced? You've got the tetrahedron, the octahedron is our basis for adding the B.
When you're generating that columnar drawing, how do you generate that length that becomes a B? What is that?
Well, this A goes up to the middle, the center volume of the regular tetrahedron in all cases. That's
so
the length from the face to the middle of the tetrahedron. So that's a fixed length, and you just step it up, up, up. This helps you remind you that it's 1/4 of the distance up to get to the center of volume from each face, stuff like that. Useful diagram. Like it's in the chat, so you should come back and look at these more.
Okay.
And then we talk about the mite, which is two A's and a B stuck together and what it can make. And then back to David in a minute, the T module he talked about and the E module. The thing about these two is they have the exact same shape as one another. It's just that they're different relative to each other. They're almost the same, but not quite. Because when you shrink wrap a rhombic tricondahedron around one of these balls, everything goes back to closest packed balls, IBM balls. They start at the beginning of our story, R for radius, D for diameter. All these polyhedron we talk about are in terms of those lengths of those balls. So if you shrink wrap a rhombic tricondahedron around a ball, so its diamond face centers just touch that ball, its volume is just an eensy weensy bit more than 5 tetravolumes. So Fuller asks himself and publishes this, it's all in Synergetics, by how much do I need to shrink this rhombic tetrahedron so that its volume is exactly 5, not almost 5, but right on the button. And that's kind of where you go the difference. The E modules and the T modules are that difference. And then there's a picture of the S module and how it fits in. So I just wanted to quickly go through BEAST. This diagram is showing the volume 4 octahedron. In other words, the complement of the tetrahedron in the IVM. The everyday octahedron of the jitterbug, the one we always talk about, has our length 2 radii or 1 diameter. It has an icosahedron inside of it that's like 2.92 roughly volume, and it's gapping in or bricking in the difference between those two that gets you your S module. And what David has shown, now that I've shown those modules, is how you can shrink these up and down. And real quick, when you shrink it down like 0.618, so every edge becomes 0.618 length of what it was. So a little more than half the size. When you shrink it down, every edge goes down by phi. The volume goes down by phi to a third power. So 1 over phi to the third power. And that's what he would call lowercase s 3, because we're shrinking, we're going down, you're going smaller and smaller. Every time you apply a scale factor of phi, it's really 1 over phi when you're doing lowercase. When you do uppercase s and go S3, S6, S9, you're jumping by multiples of 3, it's because you're applying phi each time to all the edges. So the edges all scale up by
So
1.6.
the last thing I'm confused about is the capital letter and small letter, and you just did it on S. So can you
So
unconfuse
any one of
about
these
capital and small?
modules, any one of these modules, the capital letter just signifies notationally that we are applying phi to make it get bigger. We're stretching all the edges by phi each time. So
Okay,
E or S or T or any of them, they go up as a third power of phi. So 3, 6, 9. And then
Okay.
E is applying 1 over phi, so they just shrink by at the same rate. It's just a way to notate it. It's not that fancy. It
Let me just
just,
check for understanding, please. So we take that original diagram maybe, and I get an A module. And if I call that a lowercase a, then if I take one of the struts and multiply it by 5, which means I make it about 1.5 bigger, 1.6 bigger,
yeah.
you're going to get a capital A. And that's how you're using it. Is that correct?
You're going to get a, well, it's two things. You're going to capital A, but next to it, you're going to get a number that says how much the volume has been amplified. In this case, phi to the third power. So that number is how many times it's been amplified.
Okay.
So it's A3, A6. It's not just A by itself, unless you mean A1,
If
which
I
is,
could interject,
yeah.
okay, I don't know if you can see my screen, but I
We do.
understand the confusion, Lionel, but it's unfortunate, not really, but I had to make a choice. And so if I'm just gonna have an E module, which is the original, and it's not phi scaled, it equals the same notation as a lowercase e. But I don't want to interchange them if I don't have any powering going on. So I just chose E, the capital E. But as far as a placeholder, you could say E0 because it hasn't been scaled up or down. You could say E0 on the lowercase as well. But I just had to choose one over the other. That's the only reason why. It creates confusion, but it also allows to, instead of having a negative powering, which is gets worse. I mean, when you're trying to do this notation, I'm trying to keep it clean, and simple. And that's unfortunately, I don't have like a perfect balance of a large E and a small e because they're equal. So I make a choice. That's all.
And I think I got it now. So, and just a note to say, finding an elegant notation that people don't get confused about is an art. And the letters are working really well for me. The scaling isn't working as well. It's not a criticism. I'm just saying. And thank you. So I'm done with my questions for now.
That's the scaling by phi on a two-dimensional diagram.
Actually, Can you go back to that phi scaling? Because I actually am a little confused there. Just hold it up. So
You
on
gotta
the
add two together.
no, I'm good. I'm good. So next to your hand in the vertex, we have a zone length, and then there's a smaller one.
It's
So
it's really two added together. Those two are added
oh, I
together.
was to consider it as one. Thank you. That's so
Yes.
confusing.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I
Thank
mean,
you.
this longer strut here,
That's it.
same as these two.
Thank you. So
Oh,
I
wait,
do.
yeah, I'm going backwards, but anyway, it doesn't matter.
I
So,
get.
yeah, that's the beauty of Zone Tool, is it's all phi ratioed, the lengths.
Yeah.
It's quite a deal. And I'll say this about Zone Tool. I can't remember the guy's name, if he's still here. Richard, he's working with, I can't remember his name, but he was gonna
Paul.
go with
Paul?
Paul Hildebrandt.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
usually here. He's not here today. Yep.
Oh, there he is. Hi, Nathan's your name.
Yeah.
Hi.
Oh.
You must know Zone Tool very well, I would think.
I'm getting there, but no, I wouldn't say that. I've got introduced to it by this group, and I'll put it in the chat so you can see it. I helped Paul build a big Zome that he had designed with VZome. He
Yeah.
designed it. It was an exploration of Reichert and Penrose together. And then this, then you'll see this blue ball in the middle of it that he's still exploring, which is, I think he said 30, like 30 dimensional. So there's a red layer and a yellow layer, and then the blue layer is like another exploration of that. So I helped him do that around Christmas time of last year, and I put together a slideshow that I'll put in the chat, and that's how I got to know him. And but yeah, I've been fortunate to get to know him well, and he's given me some free Zome. So I've been, going down the rabbit holes.
So I was going to explain something just in case. I don't want people to get frustrated, but you can see here that I got the dark blue, and that's my edge two in this presentation. You can see these are what they call half blues, and they're a lighter blue. All I can say is good luck finding them. And I would encourage Paul to make them again, but I'm sure there's reasons why he doesn't. But one of the things about Zone Tool, which is great, is it can help you understand synergetics, but the limitations of Zone Tool are frustrating. And it would be nice to have a set of Zone Tool parts that could make an A module, could make a B module. I don't know how possible that is. I know that you can 3D print struts, and they can make them fit into those holes on the hub and things like that. But what I wouldn't mind is some sort of, even VZome, the virtual Zome software, doesn't represent by the colors everything that we would want in Synergetic. And it's too bad, but it's possible. I've been in dialogue with Scott Borthman over the years as well, because it was emancipating to have VZome. Is there any other questions? I'm kind of scatterbrained now.
I can ask one more question. Fuller, as we know, didn't like irrational numbers. And so just can you comment on phi and why Fuller doesn't talk about it and you talk about it all the time?
Good question. It's been pondered. I've heard some things. I guess the general understanding is he didn't want to slip into the sacred geometry world, was one of them, which would attracted a lot of, I guess, not so serious people, maybe. I don't know. That's a good question. He said he doesn't like irrationals, but he still uses surds, square roots, and he still uses those, and those are irrationals.
Yeah, I would say he has no problem with irrationals, but he uses the word incommensurability. He talks about it differently. I would say he doesn't believe in the real numbers the way we're taught in school, but I don't think he's against irrationals in a naive sense, really, because they're everywhere. The square root symbol permeates synergetics. Forget about phi or pi. You've got irrationals, as we call them, throughout synergetics, everywhere.
My main point about where the irrationals go, let's say, is that they're all contained within the module. So I'm just counting it. The VE is 420 of S and plus 100 of S3. So it's a very like simple notation as far as volumetric accountability or whatever. And I don't really look at irrationals that as being that at all. I just see them as kind of more algebraic with various you know, radicals. And I think it's a pretty smooth system for volumetric accountability, and there is a bunch that's modelable as well. And it is, I'm trying to cram 40 years of work in an hour here, so
No,
I have
this
to
is
let
just-
go of something. There's
It's
a lot
really
more.
helpful. So just to wrap up that question, thank you, because so just to just like do the follow-up question. So Fuller needs root 2 and sometimes root 5, I believe.
Yeah.
And so it shows up, and he calls it incommensurable, which is very helpful, Kirby. Thanks for that. But he really has an attitude about pi, and he doesn't get around to E, not your E, but the E, natural logarithms, because those are two. I think one of them is transcendental. You have to remind me what that means, but so just to do the follow-up question, about just again pi or natural logarithm E as opposed to phi. Do you have anything else to add?
I think I've seen some pretty interesting formula that I don't understand. I think Ramanujan, an Indian, he did some pretty exquisite things with pi and E, and I think phi as well. And they're very like, what are they? Continued fractions. There are relationships, I don't know them. I don't look at E very much at all. The natural, what do you call it? The logarithmic E. But I'll say this about my mathematical knowledge. It's a pretty small area, or a small little bit, and somebody throws some of this stuff at me. I don't know anything about it. You know, I didn't have calculus, so I don't really use it and things like that. I never pursued it. I was busy doing this stuff, I guess. I mean, I've taken 15 years off, basically, raised a child and married and bought a house and all that. So I never give up on it. And it's been really quite a resurgence in my head just to get ready for this presentation. It actually generated many questions for me as well, just as stuff that I took for granted or whatever. You know, there's a lot there. And I recommend that people explore it. And I guess Kirby has been the main guy on the steering wheel to make sure that we keep in check some of the integrity of the modules in synergetics, so we don't have to scale everything in the physical world to synergetics. But if we're talking synergetics, we should not veer off from what these module relationships, volumetric relationships are. Because I think it's better to have beast as a mnemonic that can then always bring it back. You can always bring it back. Where am I? I'm on a B, well, you know, or whatever, you know. So you got that physical or the volumetric relationship.
I think, you know, Fuller's nature is not using pi meme is a little bit different. It's like not using infinite decimals in its energy processing. I don't think if you put it a certain way, it's not even controversial. It's like physics goes down to like Planck's constant. There is no need when doing physics to have that many decimal digits of precision. However many you need is probably not more than 10 or 20. So, you know, we don't use pi or phi or any irrational number in physics beyond a certain significance. And I think for good reason, we don't have any physics to do, we have no reason to. And I think if you put it that way, Fuller's contention, nature is not using pi or phi or square root of 2 or anything with infinite precision. He didn't believe you need infinite precision. To do energy processing in nature, you don't need trillions of digits of any number, right? You don't, it doesn't work that way. I think it's very not contentious. I think most people would agree. That's what I think. But then when we get to this stuff, which I'd call purely Platonic, like we're just talking about in pure principle, just shapes, I think there's a stereotype that maybe because Fuller did seem to have a problem with pi and phi and stuff, that synergetics is therefore full of fudge factors, that nothing quite fits. It's a hack. I think that's a stereotype, and I think your talk and your research proves otherwise. This stuff works all the way down in terms of precision. If you do want to go that way and have infinite digit real numbers, this is a player. There's no problem with it in that respect.
So I think Nathan had his hand raised. Joe turned his camera on, so I'm hoping Joe has something to add. And all I'll say about this is, oh boy. So got to turn my camera on. And let me futz with pins for a second. Okay, and then I got to add one for me. Okay, and then we'll go to Nathan in a second. It's so bright here. Anyway, if you could see this, this is something David left with me when he visited a year or two ago. And so these are those modules sculled by Phi. And he's got ones that go even further. And the beauty of it to me is it starts to spiral and it does represent shapes found in nature. So to me, this is a bridge, you know, between the people who say, well, synergetics, it's all these hard, yeah, there we go.
Hey,
Let me remove
so
one and show him. It's a bridge
these-
between people who say all these things are just hard, you know, and nature is, yeah, there we go.
I won't call this modules, also tetrahedra, but there's a series of 3 tetrahedra, and then you scale them by phi, and the same 3 get larger. And what's interesting is that the volume from one tetrahedron to the next increases just by phi. So this smallest guy could be 0.618, and the next one 1, and the next one 1.618 by volume, and it generates a helix. Probably my best discovery by far, which is a culmination of all the other work I did in a lot of ways. So thank you for bringing that up. Maybe some other day.
Okay, Nathan.
Yeah, I just wanted to like comment on what Lionel was talking about, and it seems like to me a very and Kirby too, a very specific point of synergetics and Bucky's philosophy that I guess what I want to call it is like a unit length, like like you have to start somewhere, so you start with 1, and if it's the Planck's constant, then that's as good as you can ever do. But if you're talking metaphysically, the shape, you start with 1, and so what he was, my feeling was that he was of adverse to the decimal point, where everything after that is an approximation, and he wasn't after approximations, he was after principles. So no reason to make an approximate principle as kind of an oxymoron, as was kind of what I took away from like a sketch of his aversion to decimal points. Would you guys agree?
I'm hoping Kirby responds.
I mean, I don't agree that he had aversion to decimals. I think if you open synergetics, you're going to find lots of 5-digit numbers. And then when he does the plane nets of like all of these shapes, it's like the square root of the square root of this or that. It's like, it's just not true that he's against decimals.
Well, yeah, if it's in a square root, that's a, you know, that's an exact, I think one of the points he made was that that's an exact thing. And calling it the square root of 2 is a thing, you know, it's just a 2. But if you try to represent it as 1 point something, that's where it got messy, and he tried to make the same point about pi.
Yeah, it's cleaner to use the algebraic notation, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, I had said Joe, and Jalen's raised his hand, so whoever wants to go next.
All right, hi, Joe.
Okay, go ahead, Joe. I'll go after you.
Oh, sorry. Did you call me or?
Yep. Yeah, if you turn your camera on, so I thought you might have something to, well, I was hopeful you'd
Yeah,
have something to
okay.
add because of all the work.
I was just wondering if you had run into Tom Miller's work.
I've heard of him.
Okay, because he has dealt a lot with the particles, and I mean that, and his new website will show, you know, an awful lot of the things that he's done, and he bases everything on what he calls a me ball, which is the size of a tennis ball, and not
Yeah.
a tennis ball, a ping pong ball. So I just wanted to pass that on to you if you hadn't run into his work, that you might want to look into it.
I've heard his name before. I looked into it. I don't have any recall of what I looked at, though. Apologies.
Yeah.
I just don't.
Yeah, that's a great thing. Then while I have a question for Joe and David too, while you're here. So he did a couple things on 52 Living Ideas, but I missed them, but they're up there. So I'll find those in his website and try and get them in the
Yeah.
chat before we leave. But one of the things I know David's been doing lately is going over great circle stuff. And I know Joe's done a bunch of that. I just wondered if either I know it's off topic for today, but if either you had anything to say about that, or if I'm pushing it, just tell me to let it go.
Well, Joe and I should talk some more. I haven't been in correspondence. We could email each other. I've been working on great circle stuff to make it simpler, because in synergetics, there are some decimals, and then there's like of angles, and Fuller really liked to use degrees, minutes, and seconds. And I don't know if that's completely archaic or not, but I was trying to get ratios that could generate these seemingly irrational angles, which are decimal. I think they got them to about 10 digits, but they're very hard to add together. And that's really what I was after. I'll stop at that because I could go on, but I don't want to.
With that, I think the question that comes up for me, since we're talking about in some elements, like how can it be translated to the real world, as a person who's not a mathematician, I wanted to see if there's any parallels between the last visual shape that you showed, or model that you showed, and like it kind of looks like the Fibonacci spiral, but like 3D, or like the golden spiral. I'm curious as to parallels. That's what it looks exactly like that if it was modeled in the 3D. So you're saying, from what I understand, that Fuller kind of strayed away from that because of the esoteric nature of it, or potential response of it.
Yeah, that it's possible. I think Fuller ran out of time, basically. I spent a lot of time thinking about the S and the E module, which I had said earlier I used to call them dead ends, because that was where it stopped in synergetics. But he was onto something. Why he even mentioned the S module is pretty interesting, but he never went further than a certain point. And I can tell that he must have been generating a lot of other information, and they just hadn't been able to consolidate it all. And I think if I was alive when Fuller was alive and I was doing this, he would like it. I think he'd go, that's great. That works, But I don't know, I lost my train of thought again, but I just don't, I think about Fuller's thinking, in doing this stuff, and I kind of run into stuff I think he ran into, and he just didn't have, what he didn't have as a tool was the ability to phi scale the modules by the golden proportion and then alter, change the volumes. Because then you can actually describe the volumes of these fivefold polyhedra and stuff with just nice integers. I think you would have liked that. I got into Fuller the year he died, basically. And the Buckminster Fuller Institute moved to Los Angeles, and I accidentally ended up there as well, 21 years old. And then I got involved with Victor Acevedo was my first Buckminster Fuller friend, and he started a synergetic study group, and it was nice to have that available. But anyway, I think about what it took in the past compared to what it takes now, and I'm just so I'm using like 5% of my technological potential here, but I knew that because I was just getting back warmed up. But
Hey. So let's see, Lionel had his hand up for a second. We do always say at about this time, David, you've been on live for an hour, which is a lot. And this group will go long times. So we want to give permission to leave when it's enough. And you've exceeded my expectations. So let's throw it to Lionel though.
All right.
I just want to add a higher level comment that Fuller's work appeals to many different types of minds and scopes, and this has been a very geometric and slightly numeric deep dive. There's no shame in staying geometric. Koski, I think that's the genius of your work, frankly. It's very important work. I can't stress that enough. Humanity moved from Roman numeral notation to decimal notation. Humanity is now, with Fuller's help, moving to some type of new notation. Decimal system is for the, wait, I want to flag one more thing. That's what I started with. This is not for everyone and shouldn't be for everyone, but it should be for a small core group of you and Kirby. Please include myself. And let's keep thrashing through this stuff, because I feel that decimal numbers are a polynomial. That's what they are, okay? They are 10 plus something times 10 squared plus something times 10 to the third plus something times 10 to the fourth. That's a polynomial. Pi cannot be expressed by a polynomial. That's why it becomes a non-repeating irrational number when expressed in decimal form. So what I'm trying to say is I would like to see the beast, to continue working on the beast. I cannot tell the difference between an A. If you just put me in a room, put a gun to my head and say, here's an A, here's an E, here's an S, they all look the same. And I would love to continue exploring how we can embody the differences. I have a feeling that humanity's next step forward is when we can intuitively just see what you have taken you 20, 30 years to see. If we can make that teachable more quickly. Every time I do an A and B session, I take home the A and Bs and I'm like, I'm going to get to know these guys. And I never succeed till today, but I haven't given up. And so that's the thought I wanted to add, how important what you are doing, how important it is. And it's not for everyone, but for those who can work on it, we need to keep going.
I'm just getting restarted. Just getting it going. This was my warm up, I guess. Thanks for listening.
It was wonderful. So yeah, thank you. Let's see. So yeah, I think we should let David go. He's, I know how intense it is. If there is anything else that we've missed, throw it in. And we'll continue in contact. And so it seems like periodic updates on some of this stuff, different representations. We would love to see the V-Zone stuff. I know we talked beforehand and you weren't quite ready. That's fine. But just, thanks again.
I have a YouTube channel. Just look up David Koski YouTube. There's more than one David Koski, but you'll be able to tell my YouTube. And it has a lot of V-zone presentations. And
Yeah.
I don't think any of them have my face on them. It's
Yeah.
just,
That did go out. Oh, William's got one before we wrap up. It's got to unmute.
I
There you
guess
go.
a couple things. Whoops, oh, there you are. So, I guess two questions. One, you talked about phi and pi. What's the difference? Or there is a difference?
yes, there is a difference.
Go to Wikipedia, William. It's very, very
Yeah.
nasty.
It's complicated.
Yeah. They're just different. They're two very different things.
Oh, okay. So pi is the one about ratio.
Pi is the circle.
Pi.
Yep, pi is all about circles and how if you have the radius or diameter, you can figure out the circumference. And
Right.
you know, to me,
It's-
Bucky's pushing against pi was just that, you know, the perfect circle doesn't exist in nature, right?
Right. No,
It's
I-
a series of points and edges,
said-
and so, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
And but obviously pi, at least to, you know, finite precision, is super useful, right, in day-to-day work and planning and
Sure.
stuff. And phi was something discovered, I think, related to the Fibonacci ratio. If you look at how things spiral out, if you look at the ratio between the sequence, the Fibonacci sequence, you discover phi, and so therefore it's a ratio of one to the next, if you will, that's found in nature and things that are pleasing to us. So that's, I'm mangling it, but at least it's an attempt. Okay, Doug had his hand up too.
Ratio, yeah.
Oh, go ahead, William. I'm sorry.
But it is that same 1.618 ratio.
Yep, phi is continually applying that ratio, and you can see that in David's stuff where it's like, well, here is this one, and now
Sure.
there's this one, but now you have to actually look at this one and how it relates to this one and this one, and you'll see
Yeah.
that in it. So very arm wavy here.
Well, one other sort of, I guess, broader thing. I mean, you said that Bucky wanted to stay away from the kind of mystical stuff or this, and I've lately come across this term, the Metatron cube. That term keeps coming up in this, which seems to be exactly the same thing as the cosmic hierarchy that he calls it, and it's just. As far as I know, Bucky never referred to it or never used that term, and yet apparently it's this ancient symbol that, you know, incorporates all of that, those geometries.
Is Kirby still there? Yeah. What do you know about that Metatron cube? And why do you think Fuller did not use it?
I get it confused with is it Merkaba?
Merkaba.
Are those different?
Same
I
thing.
mean,
Okay.
I think in general, he wanted like I've said to you before, I think his approach to writing, for one thing, he had Applewhite to help on synergetics, and Applewhite had very low tolerance for like, I don't know, tarot or anything like that. But also Bucky, I think he wanted to have a clean slate and not take on a lot of cultural baggage. You know, once you start throwing in Ankhs and hieroglyphics and Sumerian stuff, then you start to sound like everybody else, as he put it. He was very stridently trying to talk like no one else in the world and be very unique in his voice. And I think every time, if he were to import phi and start talking about the Greeks in anything but somewhat skeptical terms, he made a signature platform out of questioning things that we all learn in school, basically from the Greeks. You could call it Greek metaphysics. The right angle is just the beginning of it. Pure continuity, all these things he questioned. So to bring in phi is kind of like to concede something to your enemy in a polemical way. Like if you're in this debate, you don't want to start using all the ammo that they have. I think he's a purist is what he's being.
Okay, so I think Doug had his hand up first, but Jalen also jumped in there. Jalen, if you have to go, we'll let you go first. Otherwise, we'll go with Doug.
No, I just have a very brief comment. David, thank you for being here and doing this presentation. I've heard your name many times from Kirby over many years, and it's good to sort of see your work and see you trying to resurrect your work, because I'm trying to resurrect my high school science and math that I was very fluent in, but found myself ignorant in poetry. So that's the direction I went after college, after high school. And I've always felt like I left something important behind. So it's interesting to see you diving back into something and bringing it all, resurrecting it in a way. So thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Okay, Jalen.
Yeah, my sentiments are similar. I definitely want to thank you for being here. I have seen your name several times, and if anybody reads Kirby's blog, you'll definitely see some of those things in there. So it's just good to put a name with the face. My other point is I completely agree with many of the points, but also really like Lionel's perspective that although it may be for a select few, I think the future applications are astonishing. And it makes me think of what one of Fuller's great principles of trying to figure out the tools that nature is using. And I think that's kind of what you're stumbling on in my eyes, because when I saw the visual of what you presented, I was like, that looks like the Fibonacci sequence, but I knew it from looking at sunflowers and from seeing it in real world applications. So although it's deeply rooted in the math, I do see the future connections to nature. So I'm excited to kind of see how it continues to culminate. And although I'm not a mathematician, I do want to stay informed and guided along the journey. So I will check out your YouTube. But thank you so much again for taking the time and sharing the scholarship.
Yeah, and thanks, Jalen. Jalen is put in the chat. He works for BFI, and so he's a channel for us. Joe.
I'd like to say thank you very much, David. It was very enlightening, and I've enjoyed it very much. And I'd just like to remind everybody that energy is in motion.
This is one of your things. I had it on the wall when I heard you talking.
Oh, well, that's one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to remind you, everybody, that energy is in motion. So it moves from one location to another continuously. Therefore, don't think digitally, think analog. And that might answer your pi problem.
Well, I love analog. You should see all my old LPs and reel tapes there, Joe. Okay, Brett.
Yeah, so I wanted to go a little meta in that. So what we learned in San Antonio is that your scores in high school math determines whether you actually get into college. And so one of the things I've learned in the museum world recently is that it actually provides an alternate source of instruction and content. So I'm curious, I am not a mathematician either, but where could I find lessons or curriculum to teach this math to younger children? Because they have hundreds of thousands of kids come to the museum every year, and we could inject Zoom toys and the model making and math to keep math alive with them. Thank you.
As much as I've really used just virtual Zoom software for over a decade, getting back to the hands-on models a little bit more, it's the best way to learn. I think you want to have the form. You can apprehend it well that way. And I think that there's data points that start to come together on the polyhedra, and it's, oh, I recognize that. Oh, I see that. I see how that's related to that. But I will say this, because I've said it with Kirby a lot. There's certain polyhedral books out there, and they'll show all the Archimedeans and everything, and they'll always use edge 1, and I call it mugshot polyhedra, because Fuller actually shows how the polyhedra intertwine, like a cube and octahedron make a rhombic dodecahedron, for instance. So, it's not just the platonics. So I think that thinking is part of what should be happening, instead of just like, look at the 5 platonics, and they all have the same edge, and look at how much bigger the pentagonal dodecahedron is versus the tetrahedron. That's not really what this is all about. I forgot to say something. I'm just gonna say it real quick because I think it's kind of important. This tetrahedron would fit into a cube, and the cube would be whatever square root 2 factor bigger, but there's a volumetric relationship that many of you are aware of, that the volume 1 tetrahedron fits inside of a volume 3 cube. What isn't as known, or Fuller didn't talk about this either. You take your rhombic tricontahedron and that blue edge there, you can make a cube out of it, and it's 2/5 the volume. There's a 5-to-2 ratio here. Just like there's a 3-to-1 ratio, there's a 5-to-2 ratio, which I think is pretty important to know. And it actually, a lot of stuff's been figured out because of that. And I can't really get into it now, but so I just want people to remember that there's a cube that with the same edge has a volume 2 with, if this is 5, with the 5-to-2 ratio. Anyway, just a thought, a thing I meant to mention, I forgot.
Okay, Joe, I was muted. Ah, he's got something. Hang on, and let me pin you, Joe.
Let's see it completely. Sphere, the cylinder, and the square.
In answer to the question of, well, where do you go to get information, or that for the elementary schools or young children to start with, revisit the invention of kindergarten. And it's the inventor of kindergarten was Froebel. And there's many schools, Montessori, for instance, is one of them. It uses that technique today. But in Canada, there are many Froebel schools, and in Europe, there are many schools that still do that old kindergarten method. And when you look at the contents of the gifts that they use, it's just amazing. And so this book right here, called Inventing Kindergarten, then you may find that it'll give you some insight as to how to get back to the hands-on experimental way a young child might use in his school system.
Joe?
Yes.
What were the name of those blocks again?
The blocks?
Yeah.
Well, there's a whole series of them.
They're over 100 years old.
Froebel.
The Froebel.
Yeah. I've heard people say that they think Buckminster Fuller.
This is the typical one that he has, and that's what Fuller started with. Is this the kindergarten that he began with?
Okay.
And what the dried peas and toothpicks as well that helped him discover tetrahedron.
Mm-hmm.
And we've moved away from that. I'm just saying that that's a good source to begin with when you're looking for some of that kind of material.
Yeah, excellent point. And actually, some my other life, which I'm transitioning away from, biomimicry, we called it natural systems in Koski, the International Council of System Engineers. We had a co-chair, well, she's still around, and she did the pattern alphabet and a bunch of stuff based on nature. She's hugely into Froebel. She did some sessions that we recorded, and I have access to those. We could also ask her to come and talk about that Froebel stuff, and maybe find other people who she got to come to that session. And the other idea, Brett, is, I've been throwing this thing out here. It used to be that SNEC would have get-togethers, and people would get together, and there'd be a lot of hands-on modeling. Like Tom Miller would have a workshop and show his stuff. Maybe Joe would have something, show his stuff. The guy with the paper plate things might do it. We could do this again, and we could do it at your place, for example, right? And so we could organize kind of a workshop-y thing. We just need to find low-cost housing, and if you have access to a space to use, there's not much cost for people, right? To come in the SNEC things were often over a weekend. They weren't like long extended things either. So we have some other things that could be done to help out, that would help the whole community, I think, so. The Institute would definitely support it, so. Well, thanks again, David. We're hitting the 2 hour mark and you've been on for an hour and a half, so you get the gold star.
Oh,
And
I appreciate a star.
I'm gonna stop the recording anyway, just because otherwise